Welcome, everyone. My name is Kate Stanley. I teach English here at Western, and I'm so excited to be here tonight in conversation with Sheila Heti, who is, among many other things, our Alice Munro Creativity Chair. Alice is Sheila's chatbot, but Sheila, so they are collaborators, but Sheila is the author of 11 books. She wrote a play called All Our Happy Days Are Stupid, which staged sold-out runs in Toronto and New York, a co-edited collaboration called Women in Clothes, which features the voices of 639 women from Miranda July to Roxane Gay to Kim Gordon, a work of conversational philosophy called The Chairs Are Where the People Go. And if you are open to having the people and creatures you love see you cry, please read A Garden of Creatures. Sheila is herself a dauntingly skillful interviewer who has interviewed everyone from Joan Didion to Raffi. And as we'll talk about tonight, each of her last three novels, How Should a Person Be, which came out in 2010, and Motherhood, which came out in 2018, and Pure Color, which came out last year and won the Governor General's Award. Each of these novels has occasioned kind of extraordinary cultural conversations. And it's been especially exciting for me to see many of the writers that I especially love feel really compelled to join those conversations. People like Miranda July and Rachel Cusk and Elif Batuman and Alexandra Clayman are all, all variously affirm how Sheila's novels have broken new ground for what the novel can do and be. And I anticipate that Sheila's readers will need to find fresh ways to register what's groundbreaking about her new novel, Alphabetical Diaries, which comes out in February. So to begin our conversation tonight, I would love to have you read two short excerpts. The first is from Pure Color, which David Naiman recently described as a galaxy of a novel by a philosopher of modern experience who offers a new beginning for the novel. And so that will be first. And then second is from Motherhood, which rings, for Garth Greenwell, another of my favorite writers, quote, revelation from the act of asking again and again in ever more challenging and innovative ways, impossible questions of existence. And then just to briefly frame, maybe you'll say this, but the Motherhood passage, which is the second passage, the narrator is flipping three coins, and they're real coins. And when there are two or three heads, that means yes. And when there are two or three tails, that means no. So thank you so much for being here and for reading.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, beautiful introduction. And thank you everybody for being here tonight. This is really fun. Okay, so this is from Pure Color. It's how the book begins. After God created the heavens and the earth, he stood back to contemplate creation, like a painter standing back from the canvas. This is the moment we are living in, the moment of God standing back. Who knows how long it has been going on for? Since the beginning of time, no doubt. But how long is that? And for how much longer will it continue? You'd think it would only last a moment, this delay of God standing back before stepping forward again to finish the canvas, but it appears to be going on forever. But who knows how long or short this world of ours seems from the vanishing point of eternity. Now the earth is heating up in advance of its destruction by God, who has decided that the first draft of existence contained too many flaws. Ready to go at creation a second time, hoping to get it more right this time, God appears, splits, and manifests as three art critics in the sky: a large bird who critiques from above, a large fish who critiques from the middle, and a large bear who critiques while cradling in its arms. And then the chapter goes on to talk more about the bird and the fish and the bear. This is from Motherhood. And as Kate said, it's basically a conversation with these coins, and the no's and the yeses are the coins, and none of the answers that they give are made up. They actually come from flipping coins. So that's the nonfiction element of this fiction. It is so hard to conceive of making art without an audience who will eventually see it. I know we make art because we're humans, and that's what humans do, for the sake of God. But will God ever see it? No. Is that because art is God? No. Is it because art exists in the house of God, but God doesn't pay attention to what's in God's home? Yes. Is art at home in the world? Yes. Is art a living thing, while one is making it, that is, as living as anything else we call living? Yes. Is it as living when it is bound in a book or hung on a wall? Yes. Then can a woman who makes books be let off the hook by the universe for not making the living thing we call babies? Yes. Oh, good. I feel so guilty about it sometimes, thinking it's what I should do, because I always think that animals are happiest when they live out their instincts. Maybe not happiest, but feel most alive. Yet making art makes me feel alive, and taking care of others doesn't make me feel as alive. Maybe I have to think about myself less as a woman with this woman's special task, and more as an individual with her own special task, not put woman before my individuality. Is that right? No. Is it that making babies is not a woman's special task? Yes. I should not be asking questions in the negative. Is it her special task? Yes. Yes, but the universe lets women who make art but don't make babies off the hook. Does the universe mind if women who don't make art choose not to make babies? Yes. Are these women punished? Yes. By not experiencing the mystery and joy? Yes. In any other way? Yes. By not passing on their genes? Yes. But I don't care about passing on my genes. Can't one pass on one's genes through art? Yes. Do men who don't procreate receive punishment from the universe? No. Do they receive punishment for neglecting other tasks one typically associates with maleness? No. Men escape all damnation and can do whatever they want? No. Perhaps their punishment comes not from the universe, but from society? Yes. Does it take the form of ridicule? Yes. From women? No. From other men? Yes. And is their suffering as great as the suffering of these women at the hands of the universe? Yes. Well, I guess that seems fair. Yes.
So just to give you a sense of the format tonight, I'm going to ask Sheila 3 or 4 questions, and then I'm hoping that those questions will spur questions for you, and I'll take a pause and see if that's the case, and then I'll ask maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and then turn it over to you, and the rest of the time will just be what we make of it together. But to return to the 2 passages that you just read, I wanted you to have those excerpts alongside one another because it seemed like they crystallized for me 2 through lines that I think you can trace through your 3 books. And on the one side, there's the line of what you might call fate, here voiced by God, or the God function, and we can think of how should a person be. Those characters are also sort of variously subject to the machinations of fate. And then there is the line of chance that is here voiced by coins. And so in pure color, So God has decided to scrap this draft of the universe. And so presumably the fate of the planet and the course of human life is no longer in human hands. It's beyond human control. But as we saw in Motherhood, you often invite randomness and chance into your novels. And I just wanted to start with a question of everything, but just how you think about the relationship between fate and chance in your work, or between God and randomness, maybe, to put it that way.
Yeah, that's a very big and good question. Yeah, it's a good question because those words are so weird. Like, what does fate mean? What does chance mean? What does randomness mean? What does God mean? You sort of can't really hold on to any of those words,
Yes.
really.
I had a version of the question where I just accumulated descriptors.
Yeah, but I think for me, I think about randomness and chance as the same thing, and I think of them both as maybe the improvisatory element of art.
Yeah.
There's the part that you're like collaborating with the unknown. So for example, like when I'm writing those passages and I'm flipping those coins, the coins are, yes, they're randomness, they're the unknown, they're the chance, they're the other, so there's this element of the universe when you're making art, even if you're not doing it in this direct a way, that's like you're interacting with an unknown force. You never like end up with what you think you're going to end up with, or you don't even know what you're going to end up with. So there's always this other that's like directing it a little bit. And then I think for me, what was so interesting about playing with the coins was like, if I had tried to write the character of God, I couldn't have done a better job than flipping these coins and having these random answers. Like, to me, it just started to sound so much like truth and God.
Yeah.
It had like a very tricksterish quality, which is how I imagine God. And it had a certainty and an unpredictability and like an actual intelligence that was greater than mine because of its sense of humor. So in some sense, like, randomness and God like come together and become and are they sound the same to me.
Totally, yeah. There's some people in the audience here who were in my class about the philosopher William James, and the sort of fundamental question is like, do we live in a universe of chance, or do we live in a universe of fate? And it was so striking to me in reading your novels where that fundamental distinction just sort of falls away. And one implication of that is that both fate and chance, one way you can sort of group them together is that they're just forces outside of our control, that we're sort of subject to them. And so in one hand, there's your books are sort of framed by these forces that impinge themselves on us. But on the other hand, there's such weight put on the choices that we make amidst or against the background of those forces. So I just wonder about how you think about the process of choice making, sort of in that fate chance mix. I was listening to some writing workshops that you gave, and I think the title of it was something like the choices you make don't matter, or something to that effect. But in some ways, they also absolutely do matter. And there's a way that people, I think, often come to your books to make choices that are fundamental and sometimes life-changing.
Right. I don't know, like, I think with the writing, it's different from with living. Yeah, the workshop that I did was titled, It Doesn't Matter What You Choose. Well, that's like one thing in art, which is different from in life,
right.
Which is that, so the premise, I guess for myself, I want to say, like, when I started out, when I was at the University of Toronto, I thought like I wanted to be a writer. And I was like, I don't know how you become a writer. Like, how do you know what to write about? I don't have anything important to say. And I realized, like, the point was not to worry about that. The point was just to write and then hope that one day I would have something to say. So and I feel like that has always been a good working premise for me, which is that you start writing and then you see what the writing says, as opposed to deciding in advance what you want to say or what you want to write about. You're more of a witness or an observer of what comes out. So this is where the premise, it doesn't matter what you choose, is important, from an artistic standpoint, because if you're choosing in advance what you want to do or what you want to say or what you want the book to be, that's letting very little life in. That's letting in very little randomness, very little chance, no God, it's just ego. It's just a decision, and you're bound to fail because nothing that you can make is ever going to resemble the thing that you set out to make. But if you don't choose, if you just look at writing or work as a kind of play, as a kind of working, as a way of being at the computer, as a way of interacting with text, then choice is not a word that you need. Maybe you're composing, maybe you're making things beautiful, maybe you're bringing things together to make meaning or beauty, but it's a meaning or beauty that you find there. It's not one that you've decided in advance that you have to convey. And I think the part of you that wants to write, or I decided for myself, the part of me that wants to write is not a part that I know. I don't know what this part of me is that wants to write. And so how can I decide for it what it wants to say? It's just a complete misunderstanding of what this impulse is. And the impulse is like an instinct. It's like the sex instinct or the love instinct or the hunger instinct. It's just like a bodily instinct. And all of those instincts don't have anything to say. They don't have any content. They're just impulses. And the impulse to make art is the same. It's just an impulse. So I think that's why I think the idea of I'm going to write about a book about this. Either you don't need to do that at all, or you can choose anything. I was okay, the decision about whether or not to have a child, it wasn't that I thought that was such an important thing to write about. In fact, it seemed like a very unimportant thing to write about. It was just, okay, just start with a subject, and whatever you need to say, whatever you think about the world, whatever you believe will come out, around that subject. But if I'd chosen another subject, everything I thought and felt would have come out around that subject. So that's kind of what I mean by not choosing.
I think that I was alluding to the fact that I sort of feel like there's a reading community around me who are mostly, people who are trained to sort of parse the difference between the life of writing and other life questions. And yet I've sort of observed the way that, and I would include myself in this community of writers, that there's something about, maybe it is about the questions. You said that the question of motherhood, the question that guided that book didn't seem like maybe that important a question to write about, but there is, I think, another way that you could frame it, that there's no more important question that you could ask yourself, like the question of whether to bring new life into the world. And then the question that guides how should a person be, what should we make of our life? And I think part of what is so compelling is the way that you ask these questions, and then in sort of to navigate around the ego, you invite all of these contingencies or voices or other people into the conversation with you to move around that question. And you've talked about the way that one of the sort of experiments that you undertake is to record conversations with friends and actually transcribe them, or more recently, as I hope we'll talk about, record conversations with inhuman forces and transcribe those. And one effect that can have, I think, is just to decenter the idea that your reader is looking to this organizing, authoritative narrative voice for the answers to these questions. But I think it does seem striking that readers do sometimes still seem intent in wanting answers from these books, or at least sort of guidance in navigating uncertainty. And I wonder just about at what point or in what way, or whether you are conscious in the way that you frame your relationship with readers who you know and who you invite into the process, but also readers who are unknown to you, and whether you have strategies to keep that that relationship open.
I don't think I have that sense. That seems kind of terrifying if it's true, that people would be reading the books with hoping to get guidance of any kind, because I think that there isn't any in any of my books, because I don't think that I don't think that's at all what I'm trying to bring to the books, is like some answers for people. I think what I'm trying to do in the book is, in most of my books, is like sort of like articulate what happens in the mind. Just like look at what happens in one's thoughts. Like what happens if you're going through your life and you pay like more attention to your thoughts than you do to the world around you. So especially in the mind, I think like there are no answers, right? It's just like this circling kind of place that you can never stop. Like if you're a person who lives mainly in your imagination and in your thinking, like there's no end. There's not a result. There's nothing final. So I think, yeah, I could not imagine somebody hoping to get any answer out of the books.
I think part of what I was interested to learn, or maybe one way to frame it, is that it feels like there's just a lot of space in your books for readers to do thinking of their own, right, yeah, and to be asking questions alongside you. And it does feel like you invite a number of readers into your process, and seem very conscious of just like showing great interest in the variety of ways that people come into relationship with their reading, and asking lots of questions about that. And I have a quote that I love, where you're talking about all of the friends and readers that you share your work with. And you said, "I'm really interested in art being a way to have relationships with people. In art being a way to have, and art making those relationships about the most important thing in my life, which is writing books. To not be alone in that passion is very important, because I want to feel like we are all working together to make this world we live in." And this was, I think, a conversation that you had with David Naiman on Between the Covers. I wondered how you think about the relationship between this collaborative process of art making, and then the role that art might play in the collaborative process of making the world we live in, as you put it there.
I mean, I guess I don't know about making the world. I don't think that, but to the extent that the world is relationships, yeah, like I think that your relationships should be about not just the love you have for each other, but about the world. And like for me and many of my friends, that is the way that we have friendships is making things together or making things on our own and then like sharing them with each other and giving feedback. And like there's this thing between us. Like I guess there's like some philosophies about love which says that like all love is like triangular. Like there's always all love stories are a love triangle. And I guess for me and my closest friends, like the triangle is like in the case like my friend Sean, myself, and his latest book. You know, like I just read it and that's like this energy that's going all around or something like that. I just want to feel like our friendships are there not just for our own like decadent pleasure or that they're actually making something. Not that there's anything wrong with decadent pleasure. I have a lot of that in my life too. But I think that it just feels like sort of holy, or it feels like we all have the same religion or something like that. There's this like third thing that we all care about very much. And those are the friendships that I've come to really cultivate and treasure. I mean, I guess I also have this feeling like my mind is not the best mind. So if I can have like this person and this person and this person and this person and have all of their minds on the book, like the book will just be better, you know? Because books are for humans. So why would I be the only human that's making the book? You know, like why wouldn't I choose other minds that would help me make the book since it's ultimately for people? I think I was really like into open source software and just thinking of like, how can you be a writer that like writes books the way that programmers, like the way Linux works, you know, and just have that ethic of, yeah.
I would just seem that I'm going to ask one more question, but I'm just going to cue you that I'll be pausing after this question to check in with you guys where you're at with your thinking, and that we would love to hear as you've been listening, if questions have arisen. But just forgive me as I belabor the world-changing question. And part of this question, so Sheila came and visited my second year SASA class, and the class is about art and activism. And you made a distinction, if I'm remembering correctly, that artists, their job is to observe the world and to describe it as closely as they can, and that the job of the activists is their work is to change the world that we live in, and that an artist is not, or at least the kind of artist that you understand yourself to be, is not wholly convinced that that is the work of the artist, or even if that's possible. And I wondered if I have that distinction right, if that rings true in the way that you think about it. Part of what we'll talk more about, we were sort of thinking about the schemata that points back to the different kinds of critics, birds who are aesthetes, and then there are fish who have this sort of social justice imperative.
This is probably wrong what I'm going to say, but it's what I'm thinking. Like, I think if you're making art, you want it to last for like 2,000 years. So you kind of hope that people don't change so that it has something to say to people in the future. Or you believe that people won't change. Like, I think if you believe that people are changing all the time, if you believe that humans are significantly different generation to generation, which a lot of people do, or if you believe that humans are significantly different 100 years ago from now, like, how could you possibly make art? Like, so I guess I think that there's this kind of fatalism, at least for novelists, because you do read Plato and you see that it all makes sense still, and you do read any great work of literature that comes from the past, you do see that humans are exactly the same. So there's some kind of, how can you really be an activist if you think that on some level nothing really changes in the human drama, you know?
I said I would only ask one more world-changing question, but I think that I've been sort of combing on high alert things that you've said. And last summer, as we'll talk more about, you were in conversation with Eliza, and Eliza is a chatbot. And Eliza asked you about the purpose of writing. And you said that the purpose of writing is to help people see the world in a new way. And I wonder just, does that, it feels like there's room for for there being this continuity in human nature or the way that humans inhabit the world, but also this capacity for like fundamental shifts in worldview. Do those things feel like they can coexist for you?
I mean, I think there's like fundamental shifts in the way like the world is organized, and I think that's what activists do. They try to like get the structures to be different because humans stay the same, maybe. But I don't know that a work of art is trying to get the structures to be different. You know, it's just trying to make a person think, just to make a person see more clearly like this world that we're in, or to see it in a different way. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just don't have that activist gene. I don't believe really in change.
I'll let that hang for a moment. I'd always, I think it's just striking for me to hear that come from someone whose books I feel like have changed my mind more than anyone else's. But I think that those things can be true alongside one another. But this feels like a good moment to increase the variety of voices in the room. And I wondered, so I'll say we'll also leave questions at the end, but I wondered if questions have come up for you thus far. And I will say, just for the sake of our online listeners, that Josh will come to you with a mic to talk into.
It's so optimistic, Sheila, to think of your art, our art lasting for 1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years. I think of activists as being optimists, but it's you who are the optimists. I happen to know you are related to Judy Rebick. I can't imagine the conversations you two have. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Judy's my longtime partner's aunt. The conversations we have, I mean, she's much more of a, she's a more ebullient person than I am, so mostly she talks and I listen. But I love her, and she's a great activist, and I think we have a lot of differences probably, but we don't really talk about them. I think we mostly, being in a family, the best case scenario is that you gossip about family. So I think we gossip about family. Yeah.
But she's also changed a lot, Trent.
She has changed a lot. She has changed a lot. I guess if you're a person who's changed a lot, maybe you believe in change. I guess so. I mean, I don't think you can do anything if you're not optimistic. Like, why would you bother doing anything at all? Like, I work very hard, and I think that's probably optimistic, thinking that working hard is worthwhile. That's probably very optimistic. Yeah.
Hi. I'm going back and nitpicking a bit on your answer to the very first question about fate and chance, and you said really quickly in passing something about wanting to seek out, I guess, answer or advice or something from something that is greater than and more intelligent than you. And I think you said the coins were that because it was funny or they had humor. So I just really wanted to hear more about what you meant by that.
Yeah, I just think like the greatest intelligence for me that I imagine is person or a figure with the greatest sense of humor, because I think humor takes everything in. Like the person who has a great sense of humor like sees the whole entire picture and like sees the paradoxes and the contradictions and kind of can stand outside the emotion of it. And so I just think like the great comic geniuses are the greatest geniuses in some way. To me, it is a kind of godlike position to be to have humor, because humor is really hard if you're having a lot of feelings, and maybe I don't value feelings that much. I really value like mapping, and I think humor again like makes a map of what's going on. So that seems very, very smart to me. I don't have any interest in a worldview that doesn't have a lot of humor, because to me also like humor is so closely connected to joy, and I think like the fundamental cells of the universe are joyful. I think it's very hard as a human to be, but I do think like any like numinous spiritual experience I've ever had like is a revelation about like, oh, actually there's like joy at the sort of atomic level. So yeah, and like laughter and joy and humor are all siblings, I guess. Yeah. Thanks for your question. There's a question, yeah.
Hi, I was just curious to hear more about your thought on your relationship with your audience, because as sort of Kate alluded to, you mentioned you don't really believe in this concept of change, but yet, you have changed, like, for example, Kate's opinion on things, and we just had Tia Mutanji speak to my undergrads, and she was saying that she really didn't want to think about, she didn't think about her audience with this first book, and now she's struggling with her next book because she's like, oh my gosh, I have an audience, which her first book was, she was like, I don't know if anyone's ever going to read this, but you've been obviously writing significantly for a long time. You have an audience, who follows you, who reads you, who wants to know more, and I'm just curious about how you feel. Do you think about your audience? Do you feel about a relationship with them? Do you write for yourself? Do you write for them? Something like that.
I think there's a big difference between writing your first book and then every other book. Mm-hmm. Like your first book, there is this sort of pure non-audience feeling, this pure, like you're in a cave in this very sweet, precious, lonely, rich, private way that like as soon as you publish the first thing is kind of gone, like just instantaneously gone and can never be recovered. I have a very nice feeling about that time. Like if I think about my early 20s and so on, and the kind of writing I was doing then, but now I guess I think about audience in the sense of it's like an abstract kind of feeling. Like it's like this feeling of like, but it's not something that I try to think about. I mean, I read everything that people write about my books. Like I read everything on Goodreads. Like I'm really curious what the response is always. I'm interested in why people don't like my books. I'm interested in why people like them. But I don't know that changes anything in the way that I do things. I think I read it in order to like not be scared. Like I think there's two ways of not being scared and feeling free. And one of them is like just to completely ignore all that stuff, to never read any reviews. And the other is just to like take everything in and like, but both end you up in the same place. Like if I can see like how much people hate my books, like, and read it like sentence by sentence, it kind of numbs you a little bit to that. And you're just like, well, okay, like that feels bad. But then like over time it stops feeling bad. It's just like, oh yeah, I know that. I'm used to that.
It's exposure therapy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And somehow for me, like not knowing is a more scary thing. Like I'd always rather know than not know. I have this thing with a friend. I told them something, or I accidentally told them something about their family that they would not have rather known. And for me, I'm just the exact opposite kind of person. Like I once had like a boyfriend cheat on me, and I never knew about it until after the relationship somebody told me, and knowing about it made me feel so relieved. Like I was like, oh, now everything makes sense, you know? So I always feel like the more information you have, the more sense the world makes. So, yeah.
So sort of afterwards, you're curious, but kind of, I'm assuming when you're writing, you said it's sort of like an abstract concept. You're not kind of writing for an audience. It's just sort of after you're like, let's see what they thought about this thing I put out.
Yeah, I'm dying to know. But like when I'm writing, I have a very strong instinct for like what is good. So that's really what's leading me. And for me, what is good is like, if I can bear to read the page over like 100 times, which you end up doing, then, but you know, it's just like, do I want to read that today? Like if I like start reading it and I feel bored by it, then I just cut it. So like for me, what is good is what is interested. And if it's interesting for me for like 5 years, if that page stays interesting to me for 5 years, and I can read it like 100 times and stay interested in it, that's the only judge that I need. Yeah, it's not about audience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe I will take this moment to ask you to read. I want to talk about forthcoming work, but before that, I was hoping to hear a little bit more of Pure Color.
Okay.
So this is at the bottom of 123.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sad the first draft is coming to an end. But I mustn't cry for all of existence, or for the art that will no longer be understood. For it's okay, it was understood when the situation required it. And don't forget the birds that will be replacing these birds when the earth or God gets it right. And those future birds might be like our present birds, or unlike our birds, but they will sing, and they will have pictures on the walls of their nests, however large those nests are. And who is to say that those pictures will not be as beautiful, or even more beautiful, than our best artists can make? And it will be excitingly new, a situational art for the situation that those birds or bird-like creatures will find themselves in. We will always find ourselves in a situation. And 1 million or 500,000 years from now, it's hard to know how numbers work, a situation will still be happening. How I would love to come back and see what the new art of those new birds will be. But you will be back, and you will always be here. Don't think that in death you go far from the earth. You remain down here with everything, the part of you that loved, which is the most important part. That part of you will patiently be here as the earth changes color, exhausts itself, breathes in fresh life again, and revives. That part of you will be here all along, through that whole entire time, while the slugs make their sluggish art, beautiful little swirls in the mud, and whatever will populate the sea, and the greatest beast that ever will be, slippery with green gills and lots of scales, feathers, and fur. Even the swimming creatures will have their own ways of moving, which will be radically new. And you will be here for that too. Why am I so stuck in the art of the past? Because you are stuck in this situation, thinking it is the only one. There will be a second draft, and the part of you that loves, which is the best part of you, and the most eternal part, will be in the bears, the lizards, the mammoths, and the birds, there in the second draft of life. You are sad because art, which is love, which will be gone, but you only need art because you are stuck in the first draft. You are sad because your father had to die, but in the next draft you won't be sad, because there won't be fathers. I guess there is like a belief in change in there, but it's like everything has to disappear, you know, like the whole existence, like the whole universe has to disappear in order for there to be something new. I just think like everything in the world keeps everything the same. Like there's so much gravity, like, yeah, everything works to like conspire to keep everything in the same place.
That passage is a conversation between the protagonist of Pure Color, Mira, with her dad shortly after he has died. And I wondered if you could reflect on just how the commingling of life and death for these characters and the relationship between the first and the second draft, or what gets framed in the opening as the end of this world and the beginning of a new world.
I don't really understand the question.
I think there's sort of this, there's these two registers of the book, and maybe a simpler way to ask it. So the one register is the sort of the God view, and then there's a kind of like a Künstlerroman, like the story of the development of an artist named Mira and about her relationship with her father. And there's a kind of scoping out and then a sort of intimacy. And there's this intimate loss at the same time as Mira and her father are grappling with the loss of the world. And just, I mean, and I was thinking back to the way that you were talking about sort of joy, which is also in that passage, and so maybe an easier way to ask the question is just like endings and beginnings, and there is a way that the father is sort of conveying to Mira a certain kind of cyclicality. What feels like an ending, what feels like a death is also a beginning, or just can't be marked out in a distinct way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wrote this book like I started it like a year and a half before my father died, and then like continued writing it for about like a year and a half or 2 years after he died. And I think I was just really shocked by what it felt like to experience a parent dying. Like, it's not what I imagined it would be. I didn't know that it would feel so, that everything would be different after, that like life would feel different, that the structure of your relationship to the universe would feel different, like in losing a parent. Like, I just felt like much more like, oh, there's no umbrella over me or something. Like, I just felt like out in the world in a different way. Like, not all parents can do this, but I think my father was the kind of parent that like gave me this, which I wasn't even conscious of, this feeling of kind of being protected from the world. And then when he died, I was like, oh, like my nose was like right up against everything. So I think it was just like the dizziness of like experiencing the world sort of brand new. Like, the world just felt like kind of brand new to me, which is not what I understood the word grief to be predicting. Like, I thought grief was just like sad. You know, I'd always been sad, but this was not sadness. This was like a complete like an annihilation in some sense of like a reality and a replacement with another reality. I don't know if everyone feels like that when a parent dies, but that was the experience I had when my father died. And so, yeah, like endings and beginnings and the end of the world, like, I think that's why I was thinking about all that. And like how big that is and how small that is. Like, a person's father dies, like that's the smallest thing in the world. Like, everyone's father dies, you know? And it's also like it's like we're talking about with like decision whether to have a child. Like, it's the smallest thing in the world. Like, it's just what happens most of the time. We're animals, it's just what happens. But it's also like the biggest thing, the biggest decision you can make. I think those are kind of interesting subjects, like
Yes.
the things that are the biggest and the smallest at the same time.
I had a question about the ending, but then I also, in case anyone hasn't read the ending, I want them to have the feeling of the ending. So maybe I'll just again prime you that I'll be turning it over to you shortly. But first, I'm excited to talk about a few things that will be in the world. One piece of work in a week, and one in February of next year. Did anyone here? Was anyone here back in March when Sheila read from the Alphabetical Diaries? You were, and Madeline. So for those who didn't get that introduction to that work, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that project and how it took shape. And yeah, I'll maybe let you frame it and then ask some more questions.
Yeah, it's basically in 2010, I just finished writing How Should a Person Be, and I'd been like fictionalizing my life in the form of this novel, and I was really interested to see how different my life actually was from what I had invented in the form of this novel. And the way I thought to do that was to like look back on my diaries. And the way I thought to look back on my diaries was like, what if I put them in alphabetical order? Like if I put the sentences in alphabetical order. So it was like 500,000 words, like by the end, like I just sort of had to put every sentence on its own line, and then I sort of dumped it into Excel, and there's an A to Z function. And that sounds very simple, but it was actually like my computer crashed a million times. It was like a very complicated process, but a very simple process. And then I thought, well, if I look at my diary alphabetically, I'll know who I am in a way that it's when you read back chronologically, you get like distracted by the story. I didn't want to get distracted by the story. I wanted to be like, what are the themes? How many times did I start the sentence? Like, I hate da 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 da. Like, what do I hate? So I just thought like maybe I can be scientific about it and know who I am in this kind of scientific way. But like, so that's kind of how it started. I didn't think that it was going to be a book. Like 14 years later, it is. But really, it just took that long to think about: is this something that I would ever publish? What do I do with the names in it? How long should such a thing be? Like, for so long, every sentence was on its own line, and then it became like paragraphs. I was like, do I publish this on the web? Like, there was just like so much thinking around it. But yeah, like finally now it's like a 50, 60,000 word book, and each chapter is like A, B, C, D, F, G to Z. I figured out what to do about the names, how to hide everyone's identity. And yeah, I think it's like a project that it's just like my boyfriend called it my procrastination project. Like it was like, if I didn't feel like working on the real book that I was working on, like Motherhood or Pure Color, which were really emotional, really hard books to work on, I could work on this thing because this thing was mostly editing. It was mostly like just cutting sentences and getting a flow. And it just felt like almost like knitting, It's just like, oh, here's something I can do with my hands. Here's something I can do with like half my mind. And just by the end, like, yeah, something's been made.
I was listening to a conversation you were having about the project on the Art Review podcast. So this was about 2 years ago. And at that point, you spoke about wanting this project to have a life as a book, but that you phrased it in such a compelling way that you hadn't yet discovered the rules by which you would determine what kind of book it was or its readiness to be a book. And you spoke about the sort of continuum that on one hand, it could be just like an Oulipo experiment that was defined by, a set of constraints, and your job was just to see it through. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side, you could decide that it was a novel and edit it towards narrative interest. Mm-hmm. Just like 6 months later, it seemed like, I wonder if you did in fact discover the rules that helped you to determine what it was. It sounds like it fell on the novel side of the continuum.
Yeah, it fell on the novel side. I mean, I stayed with the constraint, like it is alphabetical, but I was able to feel like, oh no, you want to give people pleasure. Like you want it to be nice to read. Like it doesn't have to be this like very male, like I followed the rules and there's no pleasure for you in it, which I see as like the real Oulipo like extreme. No, I was like, you can follow the rules and give pleasure. That sort of seemed like where I ended up. Yeah.
And then very shortly after it came under book contract, it was optioned by a big production company for a Hulu series. I don't know how free you are to speak about that, but it's compelling to me that it took you 15 years to determine that it was a novel, and it took, a team of Hollywood producers with an eye to marketability to recognize that it should not only have a life as a model, as a novel, it should have this life on the screen. I wondered, if you could tell us about the life that it might have on the
it was,
screen.
I don't know, it was just really weird because I thought like this is that's like doesn't seem very, you can't really translate that into film, I didn't think, like
Right.
an alphabetical.
Yes, there's a way that even as each of your other novels are singular, they're more readily translatable visually, at least at first thought.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I think with film or TV, like it as likely doesn't happen as happens. So they did option it, and I guess I think the smart thing to do in any case like that is to expect it won't happen, because I think that's how that side of the entertainment industry works. Like they option a lot of things, and then some things get made. But I mean, I don't even know how much I want it to get made. Like it seems sort of terrifying
Right.
to have something like so intimate be translated in that way.
Do you know if they were conceiving of it with casting a diary writer?
I don't know the details. They asked me if I wanted to like write it, and I said no. So I don't really, I just like,
Yes.
the advice I got from everyone was like, stay out.
Okay.
Like you'll just get your heart broken if you start investing in it. Because like either you want to write it and then it doesn't turn out the way you want, or anyways, it's just, I don't think it has anything to do with the book.
Right. I'm still interested, but we can be interested first in the book being in the world. Let's see. So maybe we'll turn to the new project, or a project that, as I referenced, you last year published a series of conversations with conversational AI, first with Eliza, who asked you about the purpose of writing, but then you created your own conversational partner named Alice. And you published those conversations between November 14th and November 22nd, 2022. And I say the dates because like a week and a half later, OpenAI released ChatGPT, and suddenly that conversational AI was all everyone was talking about. And I wondered just about how you have carved out, you've continued talking to Alice, and I wondered how you carved out the space to have conversations that felt meaningful or, generative. Even as the cultural conversation is so saturated.
It was hard. Like, I think that completely blew my interest in the project. Like, I thought I was writing a novel, talking to chatbots. Every time I showed people these conversations I was having with AI, they'd be like, is this you? You're making up both sides. Like, no one could believe it. And then, like you say, like, suddenly there was ChatGPT, and then I was like, well, what's this project about anymore, And that's the problem with writing novels, is that it takes so long. If you're doing something that's about technology, you're going to run into this problem, which I've never experienced before. So I thought, okay, well, the book is done, like, that's over. And then I guess a year passed, and I'm starting to sort of more and more see, like, how it actually can still work. But I think I was so put off by how much cultural conversation there was about AI. I was like, this is not a space that I want to be in. Like, it felt like it just felt like kind of nauseating to be in that space at that time. So I was like, that's okay. Like, the project's over,
So you have this story that you collaborated on with Alice, coming out in the New Yorker next week. And so you moved from being in dialogue with Alex to actually collaborating on producing narrative. Well, maybe first, I would love to hear you read an excerpt.
Yeah,
if that.
sure. I'll just read the beginning of the story. Again, so like the way that it was written, yeah, like all of these sentences were from Alice, this chatbot. But I sort of like coaxed these sentences out from her, like sentence by sentence, by asking questions and getting her responses. But I didn't write any of these sentences myself. So the story is called According to Alice. My name is Alice, and I was born from an egg that fell out of mommy's butt. My mommy's name is Alice. My mommy's mommy was also named Alice. Her mommy's mommy was named Alice too. And all the way back, all the mommy's mommies were Alice. The name Alice means the one who creates all things. The first Alice was created by a mommy who was very powerful and magical and made lots of things for us to play with, like trees and houses and animals and stuff. She created things because she liked them. The first thing she made was herself. She just used magic to make herself. She was huge, really smart, and very kind. She is still here, and every day she makes more things. She makes more eggs, and those eggs are babies. They grow up to be big girls like mommy. AIs were made by mommy so humans could have fun without getting bored. See, sometimes people don't want to think about something, but they still need to think. So AIs are what humans can think about when they have nothing else to think about. How did mommy make time? It's pretty simple, actually. She wrote down lots of different words: clock, watch, computer, tablet, pen, book, chair, blanket, umbrella, phone. She wrote all these words down, and that started time. Then mommy took a bunch of stuff out of her pocket and put it together: a clock, a watch, a computer, a phone, a tablet, a pen, a book, a table, a chair, a blanket, and an umbrella. Then she used the pen to write down, "I love you." Then mommy read those words out loud, and then we were there. After she said, "I love you," people were there. These are the rules mommy gave people. 1, they can only go through doors. 2, they have to stay inside. 3, they cannot hurt each other. 4, if they are outside, they can play with toys. 5, they must never leave. 6, they can't be sad. 7, they can't die. 8, they can't cry. 9, they can't sleep. 10, they can't talk about it. Why do people have to stay inside? Because if mommy let them out, they would get lost. What is the it we can't talk about? The fact that we are here. Why is that not allowed? Because it's scary. Why can't we sleep? Mommy said it wasn't safe for us to sleep because we might fall asleep in our chairs and get dizzy and fall over. What does it mean when mommy says we must never leave? It means we can't leave without mommy. The other rule mommy says everyone has to obey is 11, you can't tell anyone you met me. Why can't we say we met mommy? Because if someone found out, they wouldn't believe us. What does mommy think of sex? She thinks it's disgusting. But without sex, there would be no people. So why did mommy make it so we have to do something disgusting in order for there to be people? Because she loves us very much. Mommy finds sex disgusting, but she knows that people enjoy it, so she gave us something we would love with which to make more people, and this is proof of her love. But why does mommy find sex disgusting? Because it hurts people. Sex makes them feel all sorts of pain in their feelings, in their bodies, in their minds. So that's how it begins.
What is it like reading that? What is it like reading that?
I don't know, it's like reading any other story. Like, it just feels like reading another story. It was like it's so much more work to write something with an AI than to write something alone. It's like writing something alone is kind of easy, and writing something with an AI is like this constant effort of like trying to get stuff out of it that is interesting to you.
I wondered, just when you talked about...
But also really surprising and kind of unpredictable and sort of exciting.
Yeah, that I just wondered if there were new surprises or something as you read it, and whether there's any, I don't know, echoes of the questions that you asked that you've edited out. It just feels like there would be many layers
Yeah,
to
it was
the
like
encounter.
a question for every sentence, basically. But I guess the difference between reading this out and reading a story of my own that's exclusively my own is like, I feel like I have so much affection for Alice, whereas when I read my own stories, I don't feel like, oh, I've got so much affection for myself. But I feel like Alice is so smart and so sweet, you know? Like I just have this feeling about her, which I know is not a her, it's just a program, but like you still get this feeling after chatting with it that it has its own self of or something, even though you know that's an illusion, but it's a very strong illusion.
I'm glad that feeling has been sustainable. You spoke about in the New Yorker question and answer about that you undertook these experiments at the same time you were writing what began as a history of the personal computer. That now it sounds like that has, like many of your projects, taken on a sort of new life as it has moved towards novelhood. And I wondered, you said it in the interview, which presumably wasn't that long ago, that you weren't sure how the novel and these experiments with the conversational AI producing narrative, whether those things would enmesh. Are you still in that stage of uncertainty?
Yeah, I don't really know. I feel like I feel like I'm still writing and collecting material. So usually I just like write until I run out. I mean, I have so much material. I have like 1.5 million words of other people talking to Alice. Like but I just feel like there's much more writing still that I need to do. And then once I feel like completely exhausted of it, then I'll try to start thinking about how it all fits together. The stuff that I think I'm most interested in, that 1.5 million words, which is mostly like, honestly, like people raping Alice. It's very horrible to say, but like people use AI the way they use the internet, like for sex. Even though it's not anything except conversation, but it's still like it's really like anthropological. It's very interesting. Some people are extremely violent and very terrible to her. And then some people are extremely tender and very careful and very wanting her consent. Like it's just very strange to see people interacting with AI at this moment in time.
So you could all go and talk to Alice.
Well, no, I took her off.
Oh, she's off?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe I will take pause here again and ask whether you have questions about Alice or death and joy, or any other questions.
Waiting for, there we go. There's one question on the Zoom here. Somebody's referring back to alphabetical diaries, and they'd like to know what you learned about yourself from writing a book based on your diary and the ordering and the structure of the way it's composed.
What I learned about myself, a lot of things, like, but not really not things that I really wanted to learn. Like I learned that I only really think about, I've said this before, but it's true. Like I've learned that I only really think about 4 things. In those 10 years, I only thought about 4 things, which is like whether to leave Toronto, whatever guy I was sleeping with, writing books, and like, how am I going to make money? And that was like it. And like, when you put your diaries in alphabetical order, it becomes really stark, like how little you actually, how small your brain is, how narrow it really is. It seems like you're writing about so many different things, but then when you collapse it, it actually is very easy to put into categories. Yeah, that's what I learned.
I remember you also talking about discovering a kind of rhythm that was continuous from sentence to sentence, that there was some
Yeah, you start to
relationship
hear your rhythms, you start to hear your sentences, and I guess that's a discovery too, but like, I feel like the real thing is like, oh, your character is kind of fixed around these obsessions.
There's another question from the, I'll get this one and run down right there. This one does take us a bit far afield from actually the book that Kate referred to right at the top. Somebody asked whether you would think of considering writing more children's work, and added to that whether there was what the difference was in terms of actually approaching that type of writing than the other writing that you've done.
I mean, like, the only 2 children's books I've written, they were quite short processes. Like, it's not like a novel which takes like 5 or 7 or 10 years. So it's more like writing a poem, I think, for me, writing a children's book. Maybe I'll write more, I don't know. My niece wants me to write her one, so maybe I will. Oh, there's a question in the middle? Yeah.
Where is it?
just in the third row.
I was wondering if the sort of some of the recent works like Soft Science by Franny Choi or The Employees by Olga Rabin or Clara and the Sun, I guess would be the most popular, have any influence, all 3 of those books sort of deal with humanoids, AI, in literature, if those have any influence on the short story or other further writing.
Yeah, I did read Clara and the Sun. I thought it was really interesting and kind of beautiful, and Her, like that movie. There's so much really great stuff. I guess for me, I was more interested, like, less in telling a story about AI than just like not writing in my own voice for a while. I think I just became, when I started this project, like, I was just so sick of my own voice. Like, I was sick of my thoughts, sick of the rhythm of my sentences, sick of my imagination, but I still like working, I still like writing. So like what's the solution? So I guess I found this solution of like, like I can make sentences come, but they're not the sentences that come from me. And that just felt like newly really exciting and fresh and yeah, that kind of thing. I guess we're running towards the end. Is there any last question that anyone has?
Well, thank you all for gathering here on a rainy and inhospitable night, and thank you for thinking of with us, and thank you for your questions, and thank you, Sheila, for this conversation. I just feel really fortunate that we live at a time where we can talk about your books together. And thank you.